One of the things that we have to consider when we're building a cloud service that's going to talk to a mobile device, particularly Android, is on the Android side, we're going to have an application or an app that's going to be sending requests to our server. So this thing is going to send HTTP requests, and each of those requests is going to have a body within an HTTP request body, and that request is going to go to our cloud service on the server side, and it's going to our service is going to have to read this body and extract objects out of that body, because we want to be able to communicate from the objects on the device, which are going to be Java objects in our Android app. We're going to have to extract data, turn them into a request body, and then we're going to have to, on the service side, preferably extract those objects that we sent to the service back out. And then when the service is done, what we're going to want to do is take the object or objects that's the return from our service's invocation, and we're going to want to turn that into a response that has a body attached to it that's going to go back to the device, and then we're going to have to read from that body and try to extract some Java objects from it. So one of the important considerations is we have to think about how do we express whenever we go and encode objects into a body, how do we represent those objects and express them? What is the format that we use to express objects in an HTTP request body or in an HTTP response body? So one of the most common formats for expressing objects when you're using the HTTP protocol is using a data format called the JavaScript object notation. And it's simply a way of simply expressing objects in textual format so that they can be sent in HTTP bodies of messages, and then on either side converted back into object representations. The JavaScript object notation, or JSON, is a simple data format, and we express an object as follows. We start by having a brace and then a closing brace, and within the braces we can express the properties, or we can think of them as member variables and values of an object, or another way of thinking of it is a set of keys and values. So let's say we have in this object a value called, or a key called name, or a member variable called name. We would then express the mapping of that name to the actual value as follows. And then let's say that we wanted to have another property in this object. We could go and we could add another one, and we could say class of MOOC, and then we could say Coursera. And then if we wanted to have another one, we could say university. And then we could say Vanderbilt or Vandy. And so we can create a representation of an object by creating the braces, and then we simply have a key or a member variable name followed by the value for it, when we're separating by a colon. Now the other interesting thing is we can nest the objects within each other. So for example, maybe we would like to express some information about this course as an object that gets embedded within my object. So we might want to say mobile cloud, and then we could say that's also going to be an object embedded within. We see the embedded braces, and then we say date, and we could have some information on the date, and we could say URL, and then have some information on the URL for this thing. And so we can build up and nest objects within each other using the JavaScript or JSON notation. And it's a very simple format. All we've got are a set of keys or member variable names, colons, and then a set of values, which, if they're strings, they're quoted. We can also do numeric values. So if we had another object that was something like course, and then we said mobile, cloud, and then we might want to say enrolled, and we could say 40,000, and that could be a valid property. So we can quickly build up representations of objects in a sort of platform-independent way using a simple textual format with JSON and have those objects passed as strings in either request bodies or response bodies of our HTTP messages. Another thing that we can do is we can have arrays. So for example, we could have an array for dates. Maybe we don't want a one date, but we want dates where this is going to be offered in the future. And we could say, we're going to start an array, and we could say, date 1, we could have whatever value we wanted, another comma, date 2, and then we could close this up. And this is very similar to what we have above. It's just another value, except in this case, rather than our curly braces, we're just using array notation like we would in Java. We're defining sort of an array with indexing, and we're going to define the values within that array. And we have values in here, but we could just as easily have objects separated by commas within this array. And so we can build up complex structures that we are sending across in HTTP requests and responses using JavaScript object notation. And we'll see this is a very handy format to express data in and to exchange data between the mobile device and the server. Now, some of you may be familiar with XML and say, why don't we do this with XML? You could do this with XML, but it's very interesting because JavaScript object notation is much more condensed and compact than XML. And so there's actually been studies that have shown that you can measure the difference in power consumption on a mobile device between communicating with JSON in your HTTP request and response bodies versus communicating with XML. So this is a much more efficient, both from a power standpoint, parsing standpoint, and sort of ease of writing standpoint than XML is.